In the first video, we covered 6 of these myths to help establish a common language, a common understanding of innovation. And those myths that we've covered so far were creativity is the same as innovation. Innovation only means breakthroughs. Innovation only means new technologies, products, and services. Innovation is a job for experts and specialists. You have to be born innovative. It can't be taught. And innovation is too unpredictable to plan and manage.
So if you haven't watched part 1 yet, be sure to watch it after this video because there's a lot of good things in there.
So let's proceed with the last 6 of the myths that we'd like to cover. The first is that innovation starts with a new idea. Boy, is that really common in the world.
What do you think, by the way? Is that a myth or is that a fact?
We said in the first video also that there may be a kernel of truth in these myths, and yet they're limited in terms of how they really empower people and engage them across the organization. So in this myth, to unfold it, we'd like to take people through a simple breathing exercise in which they go through 3 different breathing rhythms. The first is where they inhale on 1 out of 9 counts, but exhale on the other 8. So it's a very quick inhale and a long exhale. Then we reverse that. We have them inhale for a long 8 count and then exhale on 9. And the third one, we have them inhale more in a balanced rhythm. They inhale for 4 counts, they exhale for 5. And this introduces them to the notion that there is an inhale and an exhale rhythm that we can find for innovation itself. That the inhale for innovation is where you gain the knowledge and the raw material, if you will, for innovation. You share your learning, and therefore you have enough substance, enough information to know what kind of ideas you need to generate as the first part of the exhale, because the exhale is where you actually start with a new idea and then another new idea and so on until you can decide what to do, implement it, and see what kind of results you have.
So innovation has a breathing rhythm, and it's important to take a good inhale and a good exhale, just like the different breathing patterns. So often, sometimes we take a quick inhale and then we exhale. We've got to make something happen. Or sometimes we take a good inhale, we do research, we gather lots of information, we keep researching, but we don't do anything with it until
something's due tomorrow.
And then we exhale very quickly. If you really want sustainable innovation across the organization with every person, you want to establish a breathing rhythm. Sometimes you do have a quick breathing rhythm. Sometimes you need to breathe in and out very quickly. Other times you might have longer breathing rhythm patterns. Different functions have different patterns. The financial department may have a different breathing rhythm than the manufacturing department. Also, different industries may have different breathing rhythms depending on what it is that they're innovating.
Producing toys has a different breathing rhythm than producing, say, new pharmaceutical drugs.
Exactly. But the key here is that we need to breathe. We need to inhale and gather the raw materials, which is what we need to exhale to actually produce an innovation.
Now, the next myth or fact is every function, specialty, or department needs its own approach to innovation. What would you say, myth or fact?
Now, we all know that every function needs its own process to work well, to be productive and efficient. Marketing's process is not going to be the same as manufacturing. Manufacturing is not going to be the same as financial. So yes, every function needs its own process.
And yet,
when we want to innovate together, we need an innovation process that can go cross-functionally as well as cross-culturally. If you study the process that we have, you'll see that it is the kind of process where people can come together from many different responsibilities within a function or multifunctionally, multi-cross culturally or even across industries, and they can use that innovation process to innovate together.
You'll notice this innovation process actually has an inhale and an exhale. The inhale is where you stretch with an intention and some possible consequences of that challenge. The inhale continues with a collaboration of tapping into your character and looking at factors and issues. What is the information you really need to focus you? Then the exhale starts with co-creating, with generating ideas and deciding what the best solution would be. And it continues with implementing that solution and celebrating the achievement and new learning that you have as a result. So again, the innovation process in a cross-functional, cross-cultural way has some common tasks and has an inhale and exhale breathing rhythm.
So if you want to enable innovation across the organization, it is important to have a cross-functional, cross-cultural innovation process. Now, the next myth: external rewards are the main motivators for people to be innovative. What do you think?
This is a good one. It's actually some wonderful research by Barry Posner, the Dean of Santa Clara University's Graduate School of Business, in which he asked people 3 questions in many, many different companies. The first question is, how well do you understand your company's values? Second question, how well do you understand your own personal values? What's important to you? The third question was, how committed are you to your work? It's very interesting because when people were not so clear on their company values, not so clear on their personal values, their commitment score on a 7-point scale averaged 4.9. If it was high and high, the average score was 6.3, which is actually a 30% increase of commitment. The interesting thing, though, was the other 2 possibilities. If a person was not clear about their personal values, but was very clear about the company values, there had been a really good values campaign rolled out, there was no increase in the average score for commitment. But if the person wasn't that clear about company values, but was very clear about what was important to them, the commitment level was 6.1 out of 7 point. It was almost the same as the high and high scale. So really, this sense of commitment, which is what it takes to really take an innovative idea forward and really make something happen and produce a benefit, that we drew from this the lesson that your personal values as the inner guide, the inner motivator for you, is an essential part of enabling innovation. And how do you tap into those values, not only yourself, but within all of your colleagues?
Another foundation that we believe is extremely important when you're enabling innovation across the organization is to make sure that it's founded in good character. And we call that human values. Human values are the qualities of good character that you find in all cultures across time. And so we say, let's have human values be what energizes how we innovate, what we innovate, and why we innovate.
Now, there are some people for whom values is kind of a private conversation, or not a conversation, it's a private consideration. And so they like to be implicit with their values. They just like to live them. They don't talk about them a whole lot. Other people like to be more explicit. They like it to be in conversation. What are your values? What are our values? How do we bring those together? And what's important is to honor that both implicit and explicit, the private consideration of values, the public conversation of values, are both important, and to honor those preferences within each other.
The next myth is, in the workplace, a climate for innovation is the same as a culture for innovation.
This is something that often the words are used interchangeably, back and forth. Climate, culture, culture, climate, as if they're the same thing.
So think about a time in your career when your boss changed. What changed? Typically, people talk about there was a change in the style of communication. There was a change in priorities. There might have even been a change in the routine. Those are the kind of changes people typically report when their boss changes.
Now think of a time in your career when you actually moved to a new company. And what changed then? You know, typically people would say, Well, there was a complete change of my job description, or a whole different way that the company operated, the systems, the policies they had. It was a very big adjustment.
The annual performance review probably changed. Yes, definitely the systems that they used, maybe the productivity tools that they used also changed as well.
And this is a good sense of what's the difference between climate and culture. Climate really is the set of values and attitudes that are embodied by group members and influenced by the group or team leaders. And the climate can change when there's a leadership change. When your boss changes, the climate can change. And every leader can have a responsibility and power to shape the climate in his or her work group or function, whatever. Culture is different. Culture is the set of norms and values that are embedded in the organization's systems, the policies, the practices that really institutionalize the practice of innovation. And to change a culture requires a concerted effort by the very top leaders working together to make changes in those systems, policies, and practices.
The reason why we like to talk about this myth is because from time to time when we're training, especially leaders or mid-level managers, they really enjoy learning about innovative thinking, learning about the innovation process, learning about human values. They really enjoy that, but then sometimes they will lament, but I'm not sure if I can really institutionalize this with my group because of the culture. And so by separating out and being clear about the difference between culture and climate, we're able to show them at the climate level, they have a lot of power, and they can take what they've learned and they can put it into practice at the climate level. They might not be able to change the culture, but they can certainly influence it. And I think we all know that if we're doing something good and we're producing good results in the organization, it will over time influence the culture.
It will. It will. Now, myth or fact? Strategic planning based on trends and forecasts is the best way to reduce risk. Well, certainly you want to have those trends and forecasts be accurate, and yet we have a notion there's two different ways of doing strategic planning. One we call strategic road mapping. This is where you define a future goal or intention. You develop a single basic strategy based on the trends and forecasts you see, what kind of conditions you're going to be planning for. And then you create a roadmap of how you're going to get there, and you emphasize the controls to make sure, in a sense, you don't fall off the road as you're there. If you're veering off course, you want to get yourself back on course as quickly as possible because you don't want to wreck.
Now, with this road mapping strategy, you think you know what this endpoint is as well. If you're going from Dallas to New York City,
yes,
you know you're going to New York City, and you're using the road to get there.
Right. Now, there's a different thing we call strategic positioning. In many cases, you're looking out 2 years, 3 years, 4 years. You don't really know exactly what that endpoint is going to look like, but you still need to be planning to go in the right direction. And so you define a goal or intention for which that strategy is needed, and you develop different possibilities of what those future conditions could be, because you can't really forecast them and be 100% certain you're going to be right. And so you might create 3 completely different stories of the conditions that you and your competitors will all be having to be operating in. And then you define a different strategy for each one of those different scenarios, each one of those different sets of conditions. Now, you've got 3 strategies for 3 conditions. What do you do there? Well, you actually create a positioning strategy that allows you to work across all 3 different sets of conditions and know how and when to shift if those conditions begin to change, because you've actually identified what's going to be the driving forces for those changes. So therefore, you have a way of basically spreading your risk because you're not dependent upon one forecast or one prediction of trends, and you can emphasize learning and flexibility to make your mid-course corrections so that where you end up may not be exactly where you thought it was going to be, but you know it's in the right direction, you know it's within the basic mission, vision, and values of where your company is going.
The next myth is that innovation is best measured in financial terms, the bottom line financial return of an investment.
Boy, we see that a lot, you know. So one of the things that's really changed where that sense of bottom line accountability, bottom line measurement may not be as robust or as important as it used to be, is to look at the trend that's happened since 1975 in terms of the value of a company as determined by the market, especially publicly traded companies. In 75, roughly 85% of the value of a company was based on its tangible assets, that things that you could liquidate if you wanted to and get a return. Today, at best, it's maybe about 20% of the value of the company is tangible assets for most knowledge-based companies.
So think about it. If you are just measuring your return on innovation investment in financial terms, that means you may only be measuring about 20%
of the value,
of the actual value of that return.
And many people, whether you go to Fortune or Forbes or other types of magazines, when they're now rating the most innovative companies, they're looking at this intangible 80% and saying that's really the market's esteem for how innovative you are to create future value. So the question here is, if that makes up 80% of the value of your company, how are you going to manage that 80% of the value that's not tangible? And this is where the notion of intellectual capital comes in. Intellectual capital is really the ability that we have to produce innovations that create value in the future. We divide those into 5 domains. The first is top line or renewal capital, the ability to actually develop and market new products and services. But it's that capability that's actually intangible but is important. There's also what we call process capital. That's the ability to embed the wisdom and necessary approaches to improving quality, to improving costs, to improve productivity, efficiency.
Your supply chain management, your vendor management, those kinds of things.
Now we have what we call human capital, which is the ability to strengthen your talent base and to strengthen the knowledge base and how you create new knowledge so that you have that raw material to draw from as you're being innovative. Then there's organizational capital. This is your ability to formulate new business models, new strategies, new organizational designs, new organizational cultures. What is that capability that other people can recognize and actually reward you for that capability in innovating for the future? And finally, there's what we call relationship capital. This is the ability to synergize your relationships with vendors, customers, academics, society, how you innovate for the environment. It's all that capability. And you take all 5 of those together as the 5 domains of intellectual capital. And you begin to see that that is what we need to manage in order to maximize the value of what we're doing and to truly measure a return on innovation investment.
We hope you have enjoyed both Part 1 and Part 2 videos where we have introduced the how to demystify innovation and create a common language and understanding which helps to enable innovation across the organization.
Now, we'd like to leave you with a final thought. The name of our company is Values-Centered Innovation. And that's because, as we've said so far, that it's important to have a strong foundation of good character and values to inform and guide us in terms of what, why, and how we innovate.
So what really is the calling for enabling innovation today and tomorrow?
For us, it's not just more innovation. But it's innovation that is informed, again, inspired, and guided by our higher human nature so that we achieve consistently beneficial outcomes and not the unintended, non-beneficial outcomes to what, how, and why we innovate.
And for us, we call that innovation with a conscience.